You survived the Miami weekend, nailed the speech, and maxed out your credit card in the name of friendship. Now you've got one hangover, 4 pastel dresses, and 0 reasons to wear them again. Sell them on Depop. Just snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. And you at least get some of your dignity, money back. Someone on Depop wants what you've got. Start selling now. Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
There are some stories you come back to because something new in the case happened. And then there are stories you come back to because you're not the same person when you first told it. When I first covered Keeshae Jacobs, I was still very early in Murder in the Black. As a matter of fact, we weren't even a podcast yet. It was just a featured story on our TikTok. This was around 2021. And I was still learning how to shape these stories with care, context, and the steadiness they deserve. And I remember Keeshae's story making such an impression on me, I had to share it, although her story was still in limbo after I told the audience about it. And what stayed with me about Keeshae's case was who was at the center of it after Keeshae disappeared. It was her mother. She knew her child so deeply that every dismissal, every delay, every unanswered question felt like another wound. So when I started thinking about cases to feature here recently on Murder in the Black, especially cases involving missing people, I came back to Keeshae. And I'll be honest with y'all, knowing where the case is now made me want to cover it even more. Not because the ending is easy, it's not. Or because it gave the kind of conclusion that gives everybody peace. It absolutely doesn't. But because sometimes people hear a story and think, well, this one has already been covered. And I need us to be careful with that. Stories don't simply expire because they've been told before. Awareness is not a one-time thing. And for families who are still waiting, still searching, still trying to get police to listen, hearing another family's fight can be more than just information. Sometimes it's proof that they're not crazy for knowing something is wrong. The case about Keeshae Jacobs is about a 21-year-old woman from Richmond, Virginia, who texted her mother that she had made it safely and would be home the following day. It's about a mother named Toni who knew almost immediately that her daughter was not just out somewhere doing her own thing. And it's about what happens when a family is forced to become their own investigator, advocates, search teams, media liaisons, and grief counselors, all while trying not to fall apart. Because Keeshae did not vanish into thin air. She was loved, had a routine. She had a mother who checked in with her often. She had a brother who loved her, and she had people waiting on her. When she didn't come home, Toni knew the silence was saying something. So today, we're going to talk about Keeshae's life, her disappearance, the early response, the man whose name kept coming up, the devastating loss that hit Toni's family only months later, and what we know now about how this case came to a painful close. And as we go through it, I want you to sit with this question. When a family tells us, this is not like my child, why do we so often make them prove that before we believe them? Keeshae Unique Jacobs was born on August 6, 1995. Her mother, Toni Jacobs, has talked about being nervous when she found out she was having a girl. You know how people can be. They'll put their own fears on you before the baby is even born. People told her girls would give her grief. They would be hard, be a lot. But once Toni settled into the idea, She knew her daughter was going to be something special. Keeshae grew up in Richmond, Virginia with her mother, Toni, and her older brother, DaeVon. It was just the three of them, a close little family unit. Toni sacrificed for her children. She worked, she showed up, and she made sure they knew they were loved. And from the way Toni described her, Keeshae had a presence. She was the youngest, but people often thought she was older because of the way she carried herself. She was assertive, she could speak up, she gave a lot of love, but she was not a child who disappeared into the background. Toni called her daughter her sidekick. And if you have that kind of beautiful relationship with your mother, or if you're that mother, you know exactly what a sidekick means. It's not just we get along, it's grocery store runs, phone calls about nothing, checking in because that's what you do, being in each other's business in a way that is normal for the both of you. Keeshae and DaeVon were close too. He was about 4 years older than her. He had served a brief stint away in prison before returning home. Keeshae wanted better for him, and she wanted to make sure he stayed out of trouble. That tells you something about her heart, too. She was the little sister, but she still wanted to protect him in ways that she could. In high school, Keeshae was popular. She signed up for cheerleading, and Toni was the coach. But she was not someone who seemed to be chasing every party or every crowd. By many accounts, Keeshae was more of a homebody. She liked simple things. She had friends, she had a boyfriend, and after graduating from high school, she got a job. Toni said she was really good with kids, and although she didn't determine what she was going to do with her future, her mother believed that it involved teaching children in some way. After she graduated and got her job, she remained in the household with her mother and brother while she figured out her next move. That part is important because sometimes when we talk about missing young adults, people flatten them into assumptions. She was 21. She probably went somewhere. She had friends. She was grown. But being 21 does not mean you don't have patterns. It does not mean that people who love you cannot tell the difference between freedom and danger. Keeshae had a life. She had a rhythm. And Toni knew that rhythm intimately. Toni had also warned Keeshae about certain friendships, something that mothers do, and a lot of times we take it for granted. But there was one friend in particular who gave Toni a bad feeling. Not necessarily because she had proof of anything at first, but because mothers notice energy. They notice who comes around. They notice when something feels off. And oftentimes, they warn you about it. And that uneasy feeling would later become connected to the very last place Keeshae was last known to be. Before everything changed, life in that house had a kind of steadiness. And I think we take that for granted sometimes. We get so focused on the next thing, the next step, the next problem, that we forget there is a gift in life, and it's called the familiar. Everybody going to work, coming home, texting back, arguing over little things, making plans, doing normal family stuff. For Keeshae, Toni, DaeVon, that consistency became routine until it was broken. Monday, September 26, 2016, started like a normal day. Keeshae was 21 years old at the time. She was getting ready to go out with a few friends. According to Toni, Keeshae had been upset after an argument with her boyfriend. Toni and DaeVon tried to calm her down, but it did not feel like something that was huge. It wasn't a life-changing moment. It sounded like a young woman frustrated after a disagreement with her boyfriend, trying to go and be with friends just to cool off. Before Toni went to school, she and Keeshae spoke. The conversation seemed normal. Later, when Keeshae left, she told her mother, "I love you," and told her plans. That night, Toni texted or called her around 11 p.m. and told her again that she loved her, and Keeshae responded that she loved her mother back and that she would see her tomorrow, and she arrived safely at her destination. That was the last kind of normal message Toni would ever get from her daughter. The next day, Toni had not heard from Keeshae. She wasn't at home. At first, she tried to make sense of it, but around her lunch break, Keeshae hadn't texted or called her. So she assumed that maybe Keeshae went out again. Maybe she was still with her friends. Immediately called Keeshae, but Keeshae didn't pick up the phone, and as she consistently called, it was going to voicemail, which was unlike her. So Toni called DaeVon, and he claimed that he also hadn't heard from Keeshae either, but he thought maybe she was just doing her own thing. But as the day went on, the silence became louder. Toni called, no answer. She texted, there was no answer. Toni called friends. Nobody claimed to know where she was. And this is where I want to pause because this is one of the most important parts of the case. Keeshae was not the type of person who would let her phone die and just leave her mother wondering. If her phone stopped working, she would have found a way to contact Toni. This has happened before, and she found a way to tell her mother what was going on. She would have borrowed a phone. She would have sent a message through somebody. She would have done something to say, "Ma, I'm okay." That was the nature of their relationship. And I need us to understand how important that is in a missing person case. Family members aren't perfect. They do not know everything. But when a parent or a sibling or a partner says, "This isn't normal," that is not nothing. They are giving investigators behavioral evidence. They are saying, here's the pattern, and here is where it broke. Toni tried to sleep that night because she had work in the morning, but she couldn't. She had that feeling, that heavy, restless knowing that something was wrong. So she got up and started driving around. She knocked on Keeshae's friends' doors, and she asked questions, but no one had answers. Eventually, Toni's sister told her to go to the police and report Keeshae missing. Toni went to the Richmond Police Department. According to her, when she got there in the middle of the night, she was told the department was closed. She called 911 and was eventually allowed into the building. And when she told an officer what was happening, she got the kind of response that too many families recognize. The officer asked in so many words how she knew Keeshae had not voluntarily gone missing since she was 21. Now, I have to take another pause for the cause. Because, yes, adults have the legal right to leave. We've talked about this countless times on Murder in the Black. Adults can walk away from their lives. They can choose not to contact family. Police do have to consider that possibility. That's worth saying because it's real. But what often happens in missing adult cases is that she is grown becomes a shortcut instead of being one possibility to check. It becomes a reason not to move urgently. And when that happens, families lose time they cannot get back. There is no waiting period to report a missing person in Virginia. The Virginia Missing Person Family Resource Guide states there is no waiting period to file a missing person report for any person in the state. So families do not have to wait 24 hours, 48 hours, or any made-up number before asking for help. But there is the law. And then there is what families experience at a front desk when they are scared and are trying to be taken seriously. For families dealing with that line of questioning, I want to say this clearly. Do not let the question throw you off. If police ask whether your loved one could have left voluntarily, answer it directly, but bring them back to the facts. Say, I understand they're an adult, but this is why this is not normal. Bring recent text. Bring call logs, medical needs, work schedules, child care responsibility, missed appointments, social media changes, bank activity, and names of the last people they were with. Ask for the report number. Ask for the officer's name. Ask when it will be assigned to a detective, and ask whether the person will be entered into the NCIC, and name us when appropriate. If the person was last seen in a different jurisdiction, ask how the agencies will coordinate. And if you feel dismissed, keep documenting. Follow up in writing, call again, ask for a supervisor, contact local media, missing person organizations, and community advocates. Be clear, this should not be a family's burden. But until systems change, families often have to create a paper trail while they are in the worst moments of their lives. Now, Toni tried to do exactly what I just told you to do and what a mother should do. She cried, she pled, she told the officer that Keeshae would not voluntarily vanish. She pulled out her phone and showed past texts, showing the kind of relationship they had and how Keeshae communicated. The officer took her information and said someone would reach out to her in the next 24 hours. But Toni was not going to wait around quietly. Based on what Toni learned, Keeshae had been dropped off with another young woman at a home. Now, this young woman was the same friend that Toni had warned Keeshae about. With no proof, she just had an uneasy feeling about this young girl. Now, reporting has consistently placed Keeshae's last known location in the Churchill area of Richmond near the Chimbroza Park around the 3100 block of East Broad Street. Toni started her own investigation. She went to the home connected to that friend and knocked on the door boldly. A man answered. His name was Otis Tucker. Though Toni has said she didn't know him before this, some reports note that he was also known as Omar. When Toni asked about Keeshae, Otis gave a story that immediately did not sit right with her. According to Toni, he first said he had seen Keeshae on Monday around 5 p.m. But Toni knew that could not be true because Keeshae had been at home with her around that time. Then the time changed. Now he said he saw her more around 6:30, 7 p.m. To Toni, that shift was important. It was not just a detail, it felt like someone trying to build a story while standing in front of her. Toni called the police. Police came to the home. They did a walkthrough and came out saying Keeshae was not there. But Toni did not feel settled. She didn't trust Otis. She didn't trust the changing timeline, and she did not trust the idea that because Keeshae was not visibly standing in that house, that everything was fine. Toni, family, and friends started printing flyers. They handed them out in the area. They talked to people. The flyers had Keeshae's photo and details about her appearance and tattoos. Keeshae was about 5 feet 3 inches tall and roughly 100 pounds. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She had several tattoos, including her mother's name, Toni, with a heart on her left shoulder. Reports also list tattoos including a rose, paw prints, a flower, and a leaf. The neighborhood that Keeshae was last seen in was not a place where nobody saw anything. People lived there. People noticed movement, and neighbors watched who came and went. And as Toni searched the area, a witness eventually connected her to someone who claimed to know Otis. According to Toni's account, the woman who she spoke to on the phone said Otis had held her against her will and sexually assaulted her. That kind of information did not prove what happened to Keeshae, but it added to Toni's fear. She already had a daughter missing. She already had a man giving shifting answers. Now she was hearing allegations that he had harmed another woman. And over time, reporting would show that Otis Tucker did have a violent history. CBS 6 later reported that another Richmond woman, a co-worker of Tucker, accused him of rape, strangulation, and abduction shortly before Keeshae disappeared. Due to a plea deal, though, charges were reduced, and in 2017, Tucker was convicted of strangulation and bodily harm injury. He served time in that case. That's difficult to hear, right? When families say, I think this person is dangerous, they are often treated like they are emotional or biased. But sometimes they are reading the room better than the room wants to admit. Toni officially reported Keeshae missing early Wednesday morning, September 28th, 2016. According to Toni, she did not hear back from a detective until the following Monday. Now let's talk about why that early window is so important. In missing person cases, the early hours are everything. Not because every case is solved in the first 48 hours, but because that's when evidence is most available. Video footage may still exist, phones may still be trackable, witness memories are fresh. Trash has not been collected. People have not had time to coordinate stories, leave town, clean up, delete messages, change phones, or rethink what they're willing to say. So when a family feels like the case is being treated casually at the start, it's not just about hurt feelings. It can literally affect the investigation. And I want to be fair here. Police departments triage. Detectives carry heavy caseloads. Missing adult cases can be complicated because adults do have the right to have privacy and movement. Investigators cannot always tell the public what they know. But none of that erases the pattern families talk about again and again. The feeling that if the missing person is Black, if the missing person is a young adult, if they have any perceived imperfection in their life, urgency becomes something the family has the right to fight for. And I want you to ask yourself, if you were sitting across from a family in those first hours, what would urgency look like to you? With Keeshae, some people in the community seemed to share the idea that she had left on her own. And yes, there are cases where teens and young adults voluntarily leave. There are cases where families are mistaken about what someone might do. But there are also cases like this one, where a mother knows her daughter's habits and says, "No, this is not my child." Both things can be true. Police can consider voluntary absence. They can still respond with urgency. Those are not opposites. Toni continued searching. Local media eventually covered the disappearance, including a Mother's Day feature about Toni's pain and persistence and Keeshae's disappearance. But according to reporting and Toni's own frustration, Richmond police were not always publicly cooperative as she wanted them to be. On November 30th, 2017, more than a year after Keeshae disappeared, Richmond police publicly said they suspected foul play. NBC 12 reported that Richmond police were asking for help, saying Keeshae's disappearance was the result of foul play. Major Crimes Detective William Thompson said Keeshae was not a young woman who just decided to run away or to move to another state, and that it was not in her character to go 14 months without calling family or friends when she normally reached out every day. For Toni, that statement was bittersweet. She said she was relieved because it felt like they were finally believing her. But sit with that for a second. A mother said that from the beginning. My daughter would not do this. And more than a year later, the public statement finally reflected what she had been trying to say all along. Toni believed foul play was involved from the start. She said she was told blood or DNA evidence had been found in Otis Tucker's home the day that the police officers did a walkthrough after she called them. Though early public reporting around the forensic evidence was limited, later reporting from CBS 6 would discuss alleged evidence from the home, including blood-related items, but prosecutors maintained they did not have enough admissible evidence to charge Tucker in Keeshae's case at the time. That is another painful space this case lives in, the difference between what feels obvious, what investigators suspect, and what prosecutors believe can be proven in court. Those are not always the same thing. Otis Tucker became the central person of interest in Keeshae's disappearance. According to Toni, police tried to question him, but there were issues. She mentioned that he was placed on suicide watch at one point, according to police, and later on medication, and that he acted as if he did not know what was going on. Soon after, Tucker left the Richmond area. Now, I want to be careful with names and assumptions here. If you remember, Keeshae had argued with her boyfriend before she disappeared. And because of that, we can't pretend that he was never a part of the early circle of questions. He came to Toni's house when he learned of Keeshae's disappearance, and he knew DaeVon. Now, DaeVon, being the older brother, threatened him and said, if you have anything to do with Keeshae's disappearance, I can guarantee you I'm going back to jail. Now, he was scared of DaeVon, but he insisted to both Toni and DaeVon that he would never hurt Keeshae. Toni did not believe Keeshae's boyfriend was responsible. Her suspicions stayed focused elsewhere, especially on Otis Tucker, and on whether the girlfriend Keeshae was last known to be with knew more than what she said. According to Toni, she believed that Keeshae's girlfriend had a romantic connection with Otis, and that connection was later confirmed in reporting and discussion around the case. Meanwhile, the years dragged on. Toni had to live in that terrible middle place where you do not have a body, you don't have a trial, you don't have a clear official answer, but you also don't have your child. And then, just a few months after Keeshae disappeared, another tragedy came to her doorsteps. On January 8th, 2017, Toni learned her son, DaeVon, had been shot. At first, when her nephew came to her door and told her about it, she didn't believe him. She just spoke with DaeVon earlier. The night before, when she was in bed, she had a bad feeling and immediately prayed for both of her children. She prayed more for Keeshae because Keeshae was missing, and she believed DaeVon was okay, but he wasn't. DaeVon Jacobs, 25 years old, was shot at Motel 6 on Gresham Wood Place in Richmond. Police found him unresponsive with a gunshot wound, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Reports say the shooting happened a little bit before 11 p.m. That timing is haunting because the last time Toni heard from Keeshae was also around 11 p.m., months earlier. That does not prove the cases are connected. Police and reporting have said the cases were not believed to be connected. But emotionally, for Toni, how could that not sit heavy? 2 children, 1 missing, 1 murdered, within months. James Henshaw was arrested in connection with DaeVon's death. The case went through a complicated legal path. A jury at one point recommended 15 years after a murder conviction, but a new trial became possible after issues involving the case. In 2019, Henshaw accepted a plea to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 years with 5 years suspended, with credit for time served. Toni publicly said the system failed her son. And I think this part has to stay in the story because Toni was not only fighting for Keeshae, she was grieving DaeVon too. She was trying to hold on to hope for one child while being forced to bury the other. Still, Toni kept showing up. She kept Keeshae's name alive. She kept asking questions. She kept pushing for answers. For years, Keeshae's case remained unresolved publicly. There were reported sightings, but none confirmed. Rumors. There were cruel prank calls, fake messages. Toni had people claim to be Keeshae or claim they knew where she was. Some people even reportedly told businesses that Keeshae had been found so they could remove flyers. That kind of cruelty is hard to understand, but families in missing person cases talk about it more often than people realize. The public attention brings tips, but it can also bring lies, scams, and people who want to insert themselves into pain. In 2022, Datelines Missing in America featured Keeshae's case. Toni spoke with Josh Makowitz, along with Natalie Wilson, co-founder of the Black and Missing Foundation. At that time, Richmond police declined Dateline's request for an interview, but said the investigation remained open. That same broader issue kept surrounding the case. Missing Black women and girls often do not receive the same level of media coverage, urgency, or sustain public pressure as white women and girls. The Black and Missing Foundation has spoken for years about that disparity. It's reported that more than 97,000 Black women were reported missing in 2022 alone, based on NCIC statistics. This is not about saying one family deserves less attention. It's just about saying that Keeshae deserved more. Then, the case took a major turn because of something that happened in another state. Otis Tucker ended up in Jacksonville, Florida. On November 1st, 2022, Ashley Denise Fowler, a 34-year-old mother of three, was killed in Jacksonville. Prosecutors said Tucker beat her with a hammer and strangled her with an electronic cord. In May of 2023, Tucker pled guilty to second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. In September of 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison. That conviction changed the landscape. Tucker was no longer a man who had left Richmond and moved on with his life. He was serving life in Florida for killing another woman. And that life sentence gave Richmond investigators a different kind of opening. Tucker did not have the same future to protect. He was already in prison for the rest of his life. So detectives had room to approach him with a different goal, not a dramatic arrest, not a trial they were unsure they could win, but an answer for Toni. According to CBS 6 reporting, Richmond cold case detectives Sergeant George Wade and Clarence Key traveled to Florida hoping Tucker would finally tell them what happened to Keeshae. The conversation happened with an immunity arrangement. Richmond Police Chief Rick Edwards later said there was an agreement that Tucker's admission would not be used against him in future proceedings. That's a hard thing to hear. I know. Because when you hear immunity, it can feel like somebody is being allowed to walk away from accountability. But in this case, Tucker was already serving life in Florida for Ashley Fowler's murder. And prosecutors in Richmond had already said they did not believe they had enough admissible evidence to prove a murder in Keeshae's case. So the question became, do you keep trying to build a case that may never survive court, or do you make a deal that may finally tell a mother what happened to her daughter? There is no clean version of that choice. And in 2024, Richmond police traveled to Florida to speak with him about Keeshae. According to Richmond Police Chief Rick Edwards, Otis Tucker's father went with police and convinced his son to talk so Keeshae's family could have some measure of peace. At a July 2024 briefing, Chief Edwards said Tucker admitted he was present when Keeshae died and admitted to disposing of her body. Edwards also said Tucker did not admit to killing Keeshae. Tucker claimed he disposed of her body in a way that made it impossible for them to find her. Later, CBSC reporting gave more detail about the prison conversation. According to reporting, Tucker claimed Keeshae died from a drug overdose at his home and that while high, he dismembered her. He also claimed that when police came through the house on September 28, 2016, bags containing Keeshae's remains were near a detective's feet. Now, I want to be careful here because this is Tucker's version of events. Detectives said his statements still left unanswered questions. A person can confess to part of the truth while still protecting themselves from the part that would make them look worse. We can say what he admitted. He was with Keeshae when she died. He disposed of her body. We cannot responsibly say he admitted to murdering her because he didn't. But this is also where the early evidence becomes important. CBS 6 reported that forensic teams searched Tucker's Broad Street residence on October 3, 2016. Investigators said they found items including a blood-soaked rug, blanket, and cushion with blood confirmed to belong to Keeshae. CBS 6 also reported that by then, Tucker had fled to Maryland, and when his belongings were searched on October 14, 2016, police found cell phones, a SIM card with family photos of Keeshae, and one of the missing person flyers her family had been distributing. Retired Richmond detective Billy Thompson called that flyer a trophy. That detail turns my stomach because a flyer is supposed to be a way home. It's supposed to be a family saying, "Look at her face. Help us find her." and for investigators to find that same flyer in the belongings of the man at the center of the case after everything Toni had been saying. It raises the question this case keeps forcing us back to. How much more did they need to move sooner? And that is where this case becomes extremely delicate. Because if you're Toni and you have been saying for years that Otis Tucker was connected, this confession confirms the part you already knew in your spirit. He was there, and he knows what happened to your child. But legally, prosecutors said there still wasn't enough admissible evidence to charge him with killing Keeshae. Richmond's Commonwealth attorney told CBS 6 that her office did not have enough evidence to bring charges in Keeshae's case. She cited issues including inconclusive forensic results, reported sightings of Keeshae after she vanished, and another possible suspect who allegedly claimed to have killed her. According to CBS 6, the Commonwealth attorney said Richmond Police Department considered the case a missing person death investigation that was closed after the last interview with Tucker, unless new evidence emerges showing Tucker was untruthful. She also said if the Richmond PD could prove Tucker's statements were false, he would not be immune from prosecution. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us with a painful official reality. Keeshae is believed to be deceased. Otis Tucker admitted he was present when she died and admitted he disposed of her body. He is serving a life sentence in Florida for the murder of Ashley Fowler, but he has not been charged with Keeshae's murder, and he has not admitted to killing her. Takeaway. I keep thinking about Toni and how much grief one person was expected to survive while still having to fight. Because Keeshae's disappearance was already enough to break a family's world wide open. Toni was searching, pleading, trying to get people to understand that her daughter did not just walk away. And then, while she was still living in that unanswered space, she had to bury her son, DaeVon, too. She did not receive the justice she hoped for in his case. And then years later, even after Otis Tucker admitted he was with Keeshae when she died and admitted he disposed of her body and dismembered her, Toni still did not receive the kind of justice most people would recognize as justice. After that update, Toni said her heart was broken and heavy. And honestly, how could it not be? Because an answer is not the same thing as peace. Knowing more does not undo the years. It does not bring Keeshae home. It does not erase the fact that Toni had to keep saying the same thing over and over before the truth finally came out. And there is an injustice in that, not just in what happened to Keeshae, but in what was allowed to happen after. Otis Tucker was left with room to keep moving through the world, and he continued to be violent toward women. Another woman, Ashley Fowler, lost her life. Another family was shattered. That's a reality we all have to sit with. Because when warnings are missed, dismissed, or not acted on with urgency, the damage does not stay in one place. Missing families should not have to become investigators overnight just to get people to care. They should not have to prove that their loved one is worth urgency. Toni knew her daughter. She knew the silence meant something. And I think about how many families are sitting in that same place right now, trying to get someone to understand what they already feel in their gut. So when we talk about Keeshae, I don't want us just to remember the ending. I want us to remember Toni's fight, the grief she carried, the son she buried, the daughter she still deserved to bring home. And I want us to remember the families who are still in the middle of that fight, still asking somebody to listen, still hoping the next call brings them closer to the truth. If this story moved you, share it with somebody. Keep Keeshae's name in conversations because awareness still helps families who are fighting to be heard. Make sure you're subscribed to Murder in the Black wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, every Wednesday I drop Storytime with Steph, where we get into shorter cases, wild stories, and conversations that still deserve attention. Then every Thursday, we're back here with full-length episodes and deeper dives. If you ever come across a case, current news story, or update you think deserves coverage, send it my way for true crime and current news. Some of the stories featured on the show have come directly from listeners, and I love being able to spotlight cases our community feels need more visibility. And if you want even more content, including my original psychological thriller audio series, When I See You, bonus content, and deeper conversations surrounding true crime and storytelling, make sure you join the paid subscription family, where you can get a lot of bonus content. There's over 100 episodes of bonus content. Until next time, stay safe. This is Murder in the Black. I'll see you next episode.
Thank you.